Okay, so we went over the basics of diet. Now we're going to go over rabbits specifically. What is it that they actually need? So we generally break the diet down into three components: hay, greens, and pellets. When I put up here the different ratios, these are estimates. You know, it's not a perfect, oh, a rabbit has to have exactly 80% of the diet being hay and exactly 15% being greens. They are, you know, estimates. So generally, though, we say somewhere between 75 to 80% of the diet should be hay. That's going to be the most, aside from water, the most important part of the diet. Then we're looking at greens, and then, of course, our pellets. And there's a nice little rabbit food pyramid that I found. That's from the San Diego House Rabbit Society. So it's a cute little diagram. Treats, of course, are up at the top. Yes, treats are part of the food pyramid, but they're not necessary. So they're more for us sometimes than they are for the rabbits. But the rabbits love them, so, you know, we just sprinkle them in here and there and let them have fun. Okay, so to go over hay specifically. So the features of hay, why is it so important? Well, it provides that fiber that's required for fermentation and an energy source. So if you remember at the beginning of the talk, I had mentioned rabbits are what's called hindgut fermenters. And so, again, that lower portion of the gastrointestinal tract, the large intestines and the cecum, that is where they're doing a lot of digestion. And the type of digestion they do is called fermentation. And so what happens when you have your hay product get to the lower intestinal tract, the little bugs that are in there, they work on it, they break those bonds between the little glucose units, and they do what's called fermentation to it and produce different structures called volatile fatty acids from the breakdown of those glucose units, that the rabbit then uses those as an energy source. Now, hay isn't just, of course, our source of energy. It actually stimulates normal motility as well. It gets that gastrointestinal tract moving nicely in a normal synchronous pattern. The hay also has silicates in it, and what those silicates are doing is that's what's doing the main function of wearing down those teeth. Those teeth in rabbits, as we know, they're constantly growing, and those silicates are really important to keep those teeth nice and trim and keep oral health, at its peak. Now, I do mention that hay is low nutrient value, and so sometimes people, get a little scared by that. Well, I'm feeding my rabbit 80% of its diet being hay, but it's low nutrients. That sounds awful, but no, it's just a fact of what it is. It's not necessarily that it's a bad thing. It's just that the rabbit gastrointestinal tract, it really takes that hay product, it moves it through really rapidly, so they're not gaining a ton of nutrition from one single piece of hay. That's why they're eating so much of it. They have to really be eating quite frequently in order to gain all their nutrients that they actually need. And an interesting fact, because they move that food so rapidly through that intestinal tract, when we look at alfalfa hay and we compare rabbit digestion to horse digestion, a horse is actually much more efficient at digesting hay than a rabbit is. Horses, when you look at alfalfa hay specifically, will digest about 40% of that alfalfa hay, whereas rabbits only do about 14% digestion of the structural component, and then the rest is out in the stool. And that's why we have so much poop all around, all over the place with rabbits, because they're just processing it so rapidly. Another important thing to know about hay is that the nutritional content of hay is going to vary from one bale to the next, and it's going to depend upon the age at which that hay was harvested, the different types of hay that are out there, the drying process, how it was stored. All these different things kind of work in to allow for that final nutrient content that then is given and provided to our rabbit. So I listed up here for you the different average value of nutrients in hay. What I want to go over really is I want you to pay attention to the protein and then the calcium content. First, we're talking about grass hays. And so the main one that we always talk about is Timothy hay. But there are other grass hays that are out there and are available and appropriate for our rabbits to be eating. You don't have to always be feeding Timothy hay. You can feed orchard, you can feed oat, and then there's a list of other ones that you can feed as well. Meadow, brome, Bermuda, rye, mountain hay. There's quite a variety of them that are out there that are okay for our rabbits to be eating. What you'll notice, though, is the protein and calcium content between all these different grass hays, and I'll go back to the Timothy and everything. You'll notice that the protein and calcium content between each one is roughly the same. They're very, very similar. When we go on to look at the other types of hay, the other big branch of hay that we look at is called legume hay. And legume hay, the main one is alfalfa, but clover is another example. You'll notice that the protein content of alfalfa hay is really drastically greater than the Timothy. So protein is 15 to 20%, whereas it was 7 to 11%. So, just about double what the grass hay is. And the calcium content as well. You can have up to 1.5% calcium in your alfalfa hay, so it's really quite high. So, that being said, should we be feeding our rabbits a grass hay or should we be feeding them a legume hay? Well, adult rabbits, for maintenance purposes, it's going to be most important for them to eat a grass hay. They do really need that sort of lower nutrient value hay. They need the stuff that is lower in protein, lower in calcium. But there are times in a rabbit's life where legume hay is important. And those are going to be times during gestation, so mothers with babies, when they're lactating and producing milk, when you have a baby that's growing. Or certain medical issues may require an animal to put on a little bit extra weight. There certainly have been numerous older rabbits that are, losing a bit of muscle mass and dropping their weight, and they're healthy otherwise. They're just starting to go into a stage of their life where they do need a little bit more nutrition again, and we may recommend that they have a little bit of alfalfa hay or pellets added to their diet. But it's always something that, yes, the most your healthy maintenance diet for an adult rabbit is going to be grass hay, and we do need to really be thinking about legume hay for other important life stages. But it's always something, if you are not quite sure, good to check with a vet and find out, would it be appropriate at whatever time in my rabbit's life for him or her to have a little legume hay or not. Okay, and so then the next portion for rabbit diet is going to be our greens. Greens are important for water. They provide vitamins and minerals as well. They are providing carbohydrates, and they are providing both the storage or non-structural carbohydrate and the more complex structural carbohydrate. In the more leafy portion, that's where you're going to be having your storage or your simple carbohydrates, your non-structural carbohydrates, versus in the more stemmy portion, that's where you're going to be having your more complex carbohydrate. I put up there that it can be an appetite stimulant for an anorexic rabbit, and the reason I say that is because a lot of times when we have rabbits that are going through GI stasis or any sort of medical issue, a lot of times the first thing that they want to eat is their greens. The greens do add a little bit more variety, a texture, and flavor to the diet, so a lot of them kind of want to go for that sort of thing first. Now, I put up here to remember with greens, it's always important to have variety in the diet. Variety is key because if you give too much of one kind of green, you can lead to nutritional excesses or nutritional deficiencies. It tends to be more of a nutritional excess problem that we lead to when we give too many greens of one particular type. So I put up a list of greens. Here's a nice list of all pretty safe greens. These are all ones that are okay to feed at many different times in a rabbit's life. They're pretty well balanced, but again, you want to mix it up. You don't want to do the same type of green all the time. One, it might be a little boring for your bunny, and two, we don't want to have too much of one type and lead to nutritional excess. I put over here other greens that are appropriate, but All of these are fine breeds, however, they are high in calcium. And so there are certain disorders that rabbits can have, and we will go over those a little later on in the lecture. But rabbits are very good at absorbing calcium from their diet. And as a rabbit absorbs a lot of calcium from its diet, it has to do something with that calcium. And so rabbits are also good at excreting calcium. And they excrete calcium through their kidneys and into their bladder. If we have a rabbit that has a diet that's too high in calcium, say that the owner's only giving kale and dandelion greens and that's it, they may be getting too much calcium, they may be then excreting too much calcium into the bladder, and you can result in certain problems, but we'll talk about that momentarily. A little bit more greens that are available and okay to give. These greens, this list over here, again, they're fine, but they're high in oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is something that can actually bind up calcium from the body, but then it binds up that calcium and it can go to the kidneys, and it's supposed to be excreted, and it should be excreted, but if you have a lot of it, it can essentially kind of clog up in the kidneys and then result in some kidney problems. And so again, we just don't want to give too much of those particular types of greens. And then I just wrote over here some veggies that are okay, but you just want to feed them in lower quantities. Focus more on as these things as treats and things to just have here and there. Okay, and so now the pellets. So pellets, they're a concentrated form of nutrition. And so really, the reason we give pellets is we're just making sure that we're rounding out that diet and the rabbit is getting everything that it needs. Rabbits' pellets is probably one of the little bit more controversial things when it comes to diet in rabbits, because some people say, no, we don't need any pellets. Other people say, yes, we need pellets. And it really is something that varies for the individual rabbit. When a rabbit is getting its pellets, well, it's getting vitamins, minerals, it's getting proteins from them, it's getting fats, it is getting some carbohydrates from them, but we really want to be thinking of the pellets more as something that just rounds that diet out, provides all those vitamins and minerals, and isn't something that's the main part of their diet. If you remember back to our little food pyramid, the pellets are the smaller portion of what they actually need. The same rules apply for our pellets of Timothy-based pellet versus alfalfa-based pellet. An adult rabbit on a maintenance diet should be on a Timothy-based pellet versus a young rabbit or a gestational period for a mother rabbit, or maybe an older rabbit that for whatever reason needs a little bit higher protein. Those are the ones that we're thinking about giving some alfalfa-based pellets. The other thing to mention with alfalfa-based pellets that I didn't, or not alfalfa-based, excuse me, just pellets in general, that I didn't put up on the notes here, is that you really don't need to feed that much. About 1/8 of a cup per rabbit per day is usually all they need. So that's basically just a small handful. They really like pellets, or most rabbits do, and will want to eat a lot of it, but we really don't need them to be having too much of the pellets. Now, the other important thing to remember is to feed a plain pellet. You'd want a pellet that is just plain, simple, boring pellet. You don't want the extra grains or dried fruits or seeds or anything like that mixed in there, because those things are all just kind of junk food for a rabbit. A lot of rabbits like them and they'll eat them, but realistically, all those extra things, there's too much simple carbohydrates in there. And when we have too much simple carbohydrates, it can lead to obesity. It can also lead to an alteration in that gut environment, so that you can have all those beneficial bacteria that are in there that are breaking down all the cellulose and everything in the hay. The numbers of those can decrease if they're getting too much of that extra junk in the diet. And then you can sometimes have bad bacteria increase, and then you can get into a gut stasis situation sometimes. So we really prefer plain, boring pellet, nothing in it.